Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you happen to be. I'm going to walk you through the fundamental of testing UI. There'll be a little bit of theory, but we're basically going to walk you through React. The expectation is that you are going to download the zip files that I mentioned in class, and then you'll walk through this by yourself. We will. There will be a quiz just to kind of help you motivate you to get through this video. We'll talk about that at the end of the class. Okay. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to use a UI testing component. There's a lot of them out there. Pretty much there's a default for each language, and so for JavaScript there's Jest, which is JavaScript test, and then there's some developments that have been added to React, and it will expose you to the complexities of testing UIs, because testing UIs typically is the user component that faces the user, and therefore we really can't predict exactly what they're going to do, but we try to mimic it as well. There's a whole bunch of UI libraries out there. There's Material UI and Chakra. There's a whole bunch of, it makes things prettier. You could use that for your final project if you want. It's definitely easy. It's something that I've been considering adding to the sample project, but I've been focusing on the functionality at this point. The React UI library has the dev, it's measured by these different metrics: the dev experience, the themability. When you build websites for a company, you want everything to look the same so that the user journey through that company feels the same. The performance, rendering stuff on your web browser is quite expensive. And if you want to be inclusive, you do actually have to consider people who have older machines with older browsers. Just because there's some new fancy thing with the current browser and the latest framework, if you're working for a company like Amazon, a lot of your customers haven't upgraded their computer for maybe 15 years. How do you build a UI for that? Incompleteness, for example. So these are the measures for these different React UIs. But really, how do we build this? So in the how do we test it? In the files that we provided, there's a to-do app, yet another one, that's built with the Chakra UI. It has more features, and as you can see, it looks a little bit nicer. It looks cleaner, kind of more modern. How do we test this? So if you remember from React, we basically build these functions. This is a to-do app, and it returns this HTML thing, and it has some built-in components in here, etc., etc. Those of you who have taken the web course, this makes more sense, but for what we've been doing in the class, this is kind of where we're at. Now, testing. Let's talk a little bit about testing. Unit testing is where you write very simple tests that test very simple parts of your code. So if your code is made up of a lot of small little features, a lot of small functions, then you can test them individually. Then as you've seen with the spreadsheet, then we need to have integration tests where we test different components. And then you have a front end, and then you need to do end-to-end testing. And typically what you have there is you have a front-end server that serves up all the pages, and the front-end server is talking to the back-end server. So we already kind of did the integration test in class where we looked about that script that I've provided that you can use as your base. But end-to-end testing basically means that you're sitting down in front of a web page and you're editing and you're clicking. So for our project, you would be going into the spreadsheet and you'd be clicking, and I see that some of you have been doing that as well. And in fact, a couple of you helped me with working on the bug that we discovered last week. It's been cleaned up, hopefully, at this point. So static, you also see that in your IDE, where it says you haven't initialized this variable. These are all good practices to have. So the higher up you go on this pyramid, the more costly the test becomes. If you do end-to-end testing with users, you're paying them an hourly rate to do this testing. Unit tests and static tests are basically free. Every time you type a character, your compiler runs on the background, and it tells you whether you've initialized it. You'll see errors appearing while you're typing, and then when you close the bracket, they go away. Unit tests run automatically every time you save your files, and so you can gauge this. The cost of failure of a unit test is very small. The cost of running it is very small, but it's very fast. The cost of failure of a UI bug is very high because you may actually end up in a situation where users can't buy something on your website, or a teacher can't interact with their students. These are very costly because it requires going back to the drawing board and fixing things all the way up. There are tools like Selenium that allow you to sit down and click on different buttons, and then it will replay those tests every time. There's a fundamental assumption to these tools, that the positions of the objects on the screen aren't going to change, or the names of the objects aren't going to change. You can actually do it by name. In fact, one of the more fun parts that I discovered when I was at Amazon was the Kindle testing lab, where they had Kindles, like the ones with the UI on them, and then they have robots that push the buttons, and then they say things, and then they have robots that listen to what the Kindle says, and they test this. That's a lot cheaper than people, but it's still, we're recording a bunch of tests, we're running them, and then we're seeing if it breaks. That's really good when your UI isn't going to change a lot. If the UI changes and your robot or your recorded test is trying to click on a particular point on the screen, you're going to get a failure. So the next level down is to look at how a web browser works. So this we're specifically talking about web applications here. Every web application basically builds an HTML document, and that HTML document is then handed to the browser. So you can actually interact with that HTML document without rendering it onto the browser. So what you can do is you can construct a situation, or a system under test. SUT stands for system under test. Get the system ready to test, then do some operation inputs. So in code, you could go say, push the button that's named Run Now button. And then you can look at the resulting output. Remember, the HTML DOM will update the document based on inputs. So basically, the way that an HTML view works is the document is always the authority on what you see on the screen. So whenever there's an update to the screen, it's essentially an update to that document, and so you can read that document and you can check and see what's going to happen. So the problem here is that we want to do our tests with our UI that avoid understanding how the back end is implemented. So you also want to make sure that your UI tests survive when the designer inevitably rearranges all of the buttons on the screen, and gets things in a different place. So every kind of language comes together with a testing framework, and in particular, what we've seen over the last few years is testing frameworks being developed for UIs, so in this particular React, and there's testing libraries for that. Jest is the DOM testing, allow you to read the document. The HTML DOM is the HTML document, and it allows you to query into that data and get that. And we'll walk through this and stuff like that. So the UI testing libraries, the React testing library is a very lightweight solution for testing reactions that are built on top of React DOM. So we're going to work with actual DOM nodes, and we'll see how this works. This is not a runner of tests. and it's not specific to a framework. The testing libraries is available. It renders the components into a virtual DOM, and you interact by firing events. You have code that do that, and you can you can interact with that. So what you can do here is you can do things like let rendered component render results. So remember we had this before each component. So we're going to have this thing here, which is a result of render. And before each test, I'm going to take my to-do app and I'm going to render it into a DOM. And what happens at that point is that all of the code that is required to build that app is run, but that DOM, that virtual DOM, is stored in the rendered component as opposed to being blasted out onto the screen. So it basically allows us to mock out the behavior of the core of React, and then we can interact with that and see if our coupling of our components works as intended. So we can do, once we have this document, we can ask for different things within that. We can do a get, a find, and a query. The difference between these is, will the query throw an element error if it's not found, or will it return a promise? You've seen promises a little bit, but a promise is a JavaScript object that you can use to wait for the return of an asynchronous operation. So if you want to know more about the queries, there's a full documentation there. This, of course, you have the slides, so you can click on that. Now, we have here the system under test. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to build the to-do app. So see here, we build the to-do app, and then we do a query here. The num item text field, rendered component. So rendered component is my DOM here. And then I add this query, get by placeholder text, put to-do description here. If you look at the source code, you'll see that there is a string in that document that has that placeholder text, put to-do description here. If you go back here, I think you can see it right there. See, there's that text right there, put to-do description here. We can also do a query of, we have these test ID, or I can, so basically here I'm searching by the text in a particular object. Here I know that I'm looking for a button. I'm looking for an add to do item, and here I'm looking for a delete button. Here's another way. We can use this data test ID. Notice that the button has this metadata here, and I define color red, data test ID, delete all button. This is specifically for testing. The user never sees this. The user never interacts with this. The user interacts with this button, and on click, it calls this function delete all items. So with ARIA, so there's two components. The ARIA role, it's another tag. It's another system that allows you to do that. So the Chakra UI provides roles for all of these components. So what you should be seeing at this point is that there's no right way to do this. You have a document, you have a whole bunch of nodes within that document. You basically have a tree, and then you're trying to find nodes within that tree. You can add names to them, like the test ID. You can do get by role, so all of the buttons would have a role button, and then you add a further filter to that, which is that the name is add to do item. And it doesn't matter how many testing kind of query things I cover, there'll be another one next week. So let's take another step back. We've had a little peek at how we can interact and query this DOM. So by now you should have this idea that your web page is just a tree of HTML documents. Uh, Now, when a user interacts with your code, they're not interacting with that tree, they're interacting with the visual representation that that tree turns into. So that's really the what you really want to test is that. That's expensive. And then there's some users that interact with it, like might be with voiceover or something like that. And then there's how your test interacts. Uh, Ideally, we want to have UI tests that interact like a user would. These are how your test interacts. That's cheap. No user does unit tests on your code, but they're easy to write. Writing a good end-to-end test is really difficult. And I tried to give you a flavor of that with the integration test for the server tester that I provided. Hopefully, you'll use that and add more tests to it as you start developing out your features for the next assignment and for the final project. Um, a whole bunch of different queries. Go ahead and read about them here by role, by label text, semantic queries. What some of the um, so so the levels here is the accessible queries are by role, by label text, by placeholder. Semantic queries are by alt text and by title, and test queries it's like by test ID. It's got nothing to do. You're just testing the functionality. So what do you do once you find this item? Well, the other part that the testing library provides is the idea that you can fire an event. And so every HTML object that you can interact with fires off a whole bunch of events. So you could actually, which are triggered by the user interacting with that button. So when you click on a button, it actually generates an on-click event. So you can actually, with this testing library, you can click on that button even though that button was never rendered on a screen, doesn't appear anywhere, but it will trigger the same code that you would have if you had displayed that screen up on a monitor and you were the user was expecting something to happen. So what I want you to do as you go through this is fire up the Visual Studio Code, and then there's a placeholder code there, and there's also the solution. And what I'd like you to do as we go through this, just read the kind of what we're talking about here, go and copy the text for that test over into your solution, or if you like, you can just take the whole solution, paste it in, but go through it line by line and understand what we're doing, right? So basically, we have describe the to-do app. We have a before each. We can have before all, after each, and then we describe kind of the test suite. We're going to have adding to-do items. Then we're going to do the to-do item component. Are we displaying it and stuff like that? So take your to-do test app starter zip, run all of this stuff. It turns out you don't have to do this. You get some weird warnings about deprecated code, but open this in Visual Studio. When you run it the first time, you're going to get one failed that says you don't have any tests. So what we want to do is we want to get a test. We want to test that the item is rendered. One of the first things you want to test with a website is, are the things that I thought were going to show up, are they there? And in particular, if you have a test that checks for basic components of your screen and you run it every time someone checks some code in, if that test fails, it means that someone has manipulated the front end such that it has become unusable, and you caught it right away. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So the strategy is we're going to render this component, we're going to find the title, we're going to find the delete button, and we're going to click the button. So we're going to find the item title and see if it's there. So this is my to-do item component. It returns an H stack with data, test ID, to do item, text, button on click, delete item. It also has an area labeled delete. So the role here would be button and the name would be delete. Notice that we're mixing two testing ideas together, and then we release that. So that's, you'll find that in your code. And so now what we're going to do is, let's see where we. So we want to test that the title is rendered, and then test that clicking on the button deletes the buttons. Now, we don't want to have a test that deletes all of our files. We want to know that the button calls the right function. So what we do is we actually don't want to delete any items in our database. We just want to test that a function was called. So I basically built a placeholder to do item here, which is just my to do component. And if you look at the code, the to do component has two props. One is the item and the other one is a callback for the delete item. And so I have I define this function. It's a just function, and the just function has a counter that will tell you how many times it was being called. So what we're going to do is, before this test, we're going to initialize this function, and we're going to say clear out your counters, so that we then can count how many times it has been called. Then we are going to check. So here's our to-do item. It's our HStack test ID to-do item, and then we say we define our test. It displays the item title exactly as specified. Remember what we're trying to do. We want to test that the item is rendered. So what we do is we basically say, is there an item in this document that has this text? Is it defined? So all you're doing here is you're saying, okay, render the big document. Now, one of those documents should have the text, item text, title text, which is some to-do item. And if that doesn't happen, so this particular tree should have this text item, and the title should be, it should be the item title should be that, right? And so you get it. So you just want to make sure that it's defined. Now, there is a different way of doing this. Is I can expect the rendered component get by test ID to do item to have content item text ID. So on this one, we go find me a container that has item title text here, and this one I say go find the node that has to do item, and then see if it has this item title text. Now this one here can break if you do some copy paste programming, and you end up with two nodes in your front end that have the same text in it. You don't know which one you got. So there is a difference here. Now we're going to test what happens when we click the button. So we are going to, it calls the delete item handler when the delete button is clicked, and the function basically says find a component that has the label text delete, and then click on that component, and then expect the mock delete item to have been called. Remember, the mock delete item is a function right here, so what we're expecting is that was called. That tells you the button is hooked up to a function, so the to-do item will call the callback function properly. Notice that we didn't have to go look at the implementation of the to-do item component. We simply said, okay, I'm going to give you a callback function, and I'm going to see if you call it. Now notice once again that this function here is not the function that you implement in your application. So there's a couple of other things that we need to do with the to-do. We want to test that a to-do item is added when we do that. So on your app that you run, you can put a description in here, and you can click on add to-do, and it will add a new item here. And what we want to do is make sure that that's actually working. We're going to follow the same pattern again. We're going to go pick out that part of the code that we want. Then we're going to trigger an event, and then we're going to look at the resulting code and see the resulting document, and then we're going to see if the right behavior happened. So the system under test is this form on submit, call on submit, and then I have this form control, which is the to-do item. There's my label. There's my input placeholder, put to-do description here. And then I register that, and then da-da-da. So basically what we're going to do down here is we're going to render the to-do app. We're going to get by placeholder the put to-do description here. And then we're going to also get by role the button name add to-do item. Right? So basically my new item text field looks like this. That's what this is. My new item button is this. So at this point, I've now found the place where I put data into, and I've found the button that I'm going to click to add that data. And so there's my setup up here, and here's my test. User event type, write a better test input. So here am I adding text to this field. And then I go click. So think about the user typing into the text field and then clicking add new item. So what we now say is we expect the rendered component to get test by ID to do item to have a text context that has this same text, right? A recommendation would be when you're writing these tests, don't hard code the two strings twice like this. Because if you make a typo on this, your test is going to fail. Not fun. Now, what happened here was that we ran this and we got a testing library element error, unable to find an element by that. So what happened here? Expect looks at the document, the rendered component DOM, right away and says, is this thing there? Now, your event type, the click, it could go to the back end, it could do something back there, it could send some data to the front end, and the front end could update the DOM, and then that object will be there. Okay, my presentation went sideways there, so that's why there's a title there. So let's go back to where we were. You've implemented this thing. We found the input text field. We've found the new item button, and we get this error that you were unable to find an element by the test ID. And the reason that happens is because it might take a while between the clicking of the button and the DOM to be updated. Imagine it on the spreadsheet. If you enter a token, it sends a message to the back end, and then the back end does some computation and sends it back. If you're looking for the result of that calculation in your front end at that point, it's going to fail. So view slideshow here. So what we would like to do is we would like to wait to see what happens. So we're going to wait until this is true. So wait for is a function that will, you say, I expect this to happen, and it will just keep retrying until it finds it, right? The whole idea of wait for is to wait for something. You wait asynchronously on this and then go and see if that actually happens. So it will wait up to 1 second. Now, we are trying to figure out what happened here. Um, we're adding a item to the to-do list. Again, here we have event type, new item field, write a better test input. Um, Click on that button, await rendered component find by test to do item. So here we've changed our code such that we're waiting for that to do item, and then we can do the test after that. So notice that we're basically putting a pause here. We have an asynchronous function here, but we're going to wait for it. So we're making it synchronous again, and then we can do an expected here. So that's kind of nice because you have this flow through your test. So there's a whole bunch of different queries. Query all by, find by, query by, get all by, find all by, and it tells you what happens if you had a match, one match, da 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 da. So each one of these provide different features for your testing library cheat sheet, for your testing library. We are not going to talk about this one. So we want to extend the test suite. I'm going to leave this to you. Test like and unlike to do button. Test the delete all buttons. Okay, so leaving it to you as an exercise. I would encourage you to go through this exercise. Do it as a team, just so you can learn from each other. This will be a quiz that's assigned to you as a team.